Alright, today I wanted to do a little something different with our usual Wildfire Insider videos. Normally we're going through the textbook Fire in California's Ecosystems, and I'm trying to share what I learned throughout the day, but today I'm actually going to be talking about the red flag warning that's popping up in California, just because this is something that we haven't seen very much of this year, but it could be an increase in fire danger throughout this weekend. So just going to get straight into the details first. It looks like Saturday and Sunday, we have red flags throughout much of Northern California, stretching down into the Central Coast as well. And what does a red flag mean? Red flag basically means you have higher fire danger than usual. It usually means that you have windy, dry conditions. And when we look at the forecast, that's exactly how things look to be turning out. So the reason this is happening is we have what's not exactly uncommon this time of the year, but it's one of those offshore wind events. That's also why the surf starts to get good right around this time of the year, even more so as you get into November because you also have the winter storms. But it's offshore winds that lead to really good surf, but it also leads to higher fire danger. Now, the reason for that is because if it's offshore, that means it's coming from the land. And if it's onshore, it means it's coming from the ocean. So just right there, that gives you one indication of why an offshore wind event would lead to higher fire danger. If you have winds blowing in from the ocean, think about the air that's moving in with that wind. It's going to be moist, it's going to be relatively cool, and it may actually bring moisture into your fuels and decrease your fire danger. Whereas when you have an offshore wind event, it's taking the dry air over inland areas and then moving that down in California. So because of that, I was looking at a number of the different forecasts, and there are some areas that could see some relative humidities around 10 to 20% over the next 2 days. So that is certainly dry enough in order to have just higher fire danger, or just the greater likelihood that if a fire does start, it would be able to spread rapidly. So we're already checking the box on relative humidity there. Does look like it's going to be dry over the next 2 days. And one thing I should emphasize as well is when I say 10 to 20% relative humidity, that's going to be at the peak of the afternoon. That's usually your hottest, driest part of the day. But what's also important about relative humidity and offshore wind events is you usually don't have as good of a recovery overnight. So a lot of times during the overnight hours, things really cool down, and then your relative humidity goes up to maybe 60, 70%. You got more moisture back in your fuels, and that's typically why you don't hear a whole lot about extreme wildfire events during the overnight hours. Usually wildfire really picks up in the afternoon, and then it goes down overnight. But when you have offshore wind events, that just keeps drier air in over the state, and instead of allowing some of that moisture to move into California. And then especially up in some of the upper elevations where you can have what are called thermal belts. Basically, I don't want to get too sciencey here. Basically what it means is that instead of your relative humidity going up a bunch at nighttime and reducing your fire danger, it actually stays pretty dry even overnight, maybe around 20 to 40%, which still allows for some wildfire activity to occur. And then what's also important to know is these offshore wind events, it's a bit different than most of your wildfire activity that you see during the summer. Usually during summer, wildfire activity is strongest during the afternoon. That's, as I just mentioned, your driest part of the day. But then it's also usually your windiest part of the day, because you get those winds that blow up the slopes of your mountains, and then the fire also likes to go uphill. So then you just have all of your factors working in the same direction. It's dry, it's windy, going upslope, then the fire also likes to go upslope, so you get pretty active behavior overnight. But during offshore wind events, they're usually what you call downslope windstorms, and that's where your largest fire impacts are going to be. So during the afternoons, a lot of times those offshore winds can actually be not canceled out, but they can at least be lessened by those winds that are blowing up the slope. Whereas at nighttime, the winds are going to be blowing downslope, And then you also have this offshore wind event. So then it's almost like doubling up on that downslope flow. And then also as air sinks, it's going to get warmer and typically drier. It's kind of like the rain shadow effect on the eastern sides of mountains or the leeward side. Usually that's going to be where you have your deserts. And then on the westward side, that's where you're going to have like a lot more forests and a lot more rainfall. Well, it's almost the opposite when you have these offshore wind events. You have the offshore winds going downslope, which is typically going to be wind coming from the north or the northeast in California. And then it's on the, you could almost say the south to southwestern sides of your mountains that are going to have that real downslope effect where not only do you have strong winds, but you're going to have maybe warmer, drier air than you normally would. So I've mentioned the winds that we're going to be seeing, but the exact numbers that I've been hearing about changes on the location. I did read one report that said it's overnight Sunday or overnight tonight, so Saturday into Sunday morning, that we're really going to see this offshore wind pick up. Across the board, I've seen numbers thrown out around 20 to 40 mile per hour gusts, but then I have seen some local forecasts that say at the highest ridgetops or the highest peaks, they could see some gusts up to 60 to 70 miles per hour. So with all that being said, it makes sense that we have a red flag warning popping up. If you have gusts up to 30, 40 miles per hour, relative humidity around maybe 10 to even 30%, that's dry, windy conditions. That's 3 parts of your fire weather triangle that the boxes are being checked. Now, the one box in your fire weather triangle, I usually talk about hot, dry, windy. That is one thing that's kind of working in our favor, is it's not actually that hot out. And it makes sense. We're getting into the point of the year where we start to really cool down, and I've certainly felt that over the last few days, especially in the overnight hours. But across the board, California just looks to be in maybe the mid 60s to low 70s throughout the day today. Pretty average for this time of the year. So we at least don't have very hot conditions, but that doesn't actually help you out too much, because the main impact that temperature has is with regards to the fact that when it gets really hot out, the air can hold more water vapor, so then that makes the air drier. And then if the air is drier, it's going to be pulling some of the moisture out of your fuels, which makes the fuels drier. And then if the fuels are drier, that means it's easier for fires to start, and then it's easier for fires to spread, especially in the finer fuels that respond more quickly to the environment. So really, temperature is important when you're talking about your fuel moisture. And fuel moisture is, I would say, the bigger part of this that is working in our favor. Now, I don't want to downplay the red flag warning at all, because obviously it's going to be windy, it's going to be dry. That alone means that you could have the potential for some big fires out there. But what I will say is this red flag warning event isn't nearly as bad as if the exact same type of event had popped up at this time last year. So this time last year, and the main reason for that has to do with fuel moisture. So this time last year, about 92% of the state was in severe drought category. 100% of the state was in moderate drought category. And right now, 0% of the state is in any drought category whatsoever. Number of reasons for that. The biggest one is that this last winter we picked up a lot of rainfall. In some parts of California, we picked up 2 to 3 times as much rain as a normal year. And then the rain obviously comes down once winter ends, but we did have some random little systems here and there that brought some more rain to California. There was a few throughout spring, I believe. And then we had, obviously, Tropical Storm Hillary that brought a large amount of rain to Southern California, even stretching into the Sierra. And then we've had a pretty good start to fall as well. We've had maybe 5 or 6 systems in the last month bring some rainfall to Northern California. That's what completely eliminated the drought throughout the state. And that does bring some moisture back into your fuels. I'm a little hesitant to get too excited about the rainfall we've picked up just because it hasn't been huge amounts. We haven't, I'd say, seen that first real big rainstorm of the season, which usually officially puts an end to the fire season. But the systems that have come through that have dropped maybe a half an inch, maybe an inch of rain here and there, that certainly helps bring a bit more moisture back into your fuels and decreases the potential for extreme wildfire. And it's certainly a lot better than if we'd just been doing nothing but drying out over the last 6 to 7 months. So that's where there's, I'd say, some good news. It's not going to be that warm out, and our fuels aren't nearly as dry as previous red flag warnings that we've seen in the past, especially if you compare it to this time last year. But with that being said, it is still going to be windy, it is still going to be dry, and a lot of the red flag warnings that I've seen look to expire Sunday evening. So then that just means we should be on a bit higher alert over the next couple of days. Maybe don't do campfires, maybe not as much barbecuing, or some of the biggest ones are actually dragging chains behind cars. A lot of fires will start on the side of highways. And it's also just good to get prepared just in case. Because I mentioned a lot of these offshore wind events can actually happen overnight. And you can imagine if you wake up in the middle of the night and there's a fire going on, you'd be a bit disoriented. And in those moments, you can kind of panic, not really sure what to do. So it's much better to just prepare ahead of time, knowing that you're completely ready for whatever happens. For example, I'd heard one Santa Cruz mountain resident saying that during red flag warnings, they just have a to-go box, or some kind of box of their just emergency supplies, maybe their important documents, and they just have that sit either maybe by your door or even in your car already. You have your cars facing out so that you don't have to kind of reverse just in case there is any quick evacuation that you needed to have, and just having an evacuation plan ready. Now, that's it. It doesn't hurt to have that kind of preparation or that kind of plan in place. In fact, it could just be practice for maybe in the future when we are back into a super extreme drought conditions, then we have windy, dry conditions moving in as well. So that's just the overall summary of the red flag warning that's in place right now and then is set to expire towards the end of this weekend. So just be on alert out there. Thought I would just share my thoughts, and I hope you all have a great weekend. Thanks for watching.